The film was made on the initiative of the BAYTAQ Green Party and the Parassat Entrepreneurs Alliance. Who owns Kazakhstan's oil? Did you know how much oil Kazakhstan produces in a year? Approximately 89 million tons. If we divide this amount by the population of Kazakhstan, which now exceeds 20 million people, each citizen's share would be about 4.5 tons of oil annually. That's a significant amount. Converting it to monetary terms at the current global price of $586 per ton, each citizen's share would amount to approximately $2,608. Now imagine if these funds, not all of course, but even a portion, could accumulate in your savings or be invested in projects that would truly transform our lives and the life of our entire nation for the better. Such an approach could give every citizen a sense of connection to their country's wealth and strengthen confidence in the future.
Но это не просто реально, так должно быть. Ну вот, например, возьмем для примера Норвегию.
Let's look at Norway. Their oil fund amounts to $1.7 trillion, with over $300,000 allocated to each Norwegian. What's the difference? We extract more oil than they do. About 70 million tons of oil is extracted by the so-called three pillars. I'm talking about Tengiz, Kashagan, and Karachaganak, which are operated by international companies. The remaining 30 million is our national production, although it's hard to call it truly national since foreign, Korean, Chinese, and Russian companies are involved. The portion controlled by Kasmunay is relatively small, while the lion's share is extracted by Tengiz, Kashagan, and Karachaganak.
Дело в том, что
The method of accumulating funds in other countries is somewhat different. We direct our national fund to cover budget expenditures, which are often neither transparent nor efficient. For example, last year's scheme involving Kasmunay gas shares was a glaring example. As I wrote in my Telegram post, the parliament should have declared a vote of no confidence in the government, then led by Alikhan Smailov, because they devised a mechanism to siphon money from the national fund while bypassing the parliament entirely. That's why it's so crucial to know who really owns our natural resources and where the revenues from their sale, particularly oil, are directed. Black gold forms the backbone of our treasury. Oil accounts for, just imagine, over 80% of our budget. In essence, oil directly affects everyone because it remains the lifeblood of Kazakhstan's economy, influencing our daily lives, generating national income, and sustaining our international standing.
мы добываем в 2-2,5 раза меньше, чем Эмираты, при этом
We extract 2.5 times less oil than the Emirates. Meanwhile, Kasmunay Gas controls only 25% of the oil and 15% of the gas. How can a national company ensure sufficient tax revenues and local content with such a low share? Moreover, the current state of Kasmunay Gas is less than ideal. Let's call it that. Their production now depends on two factors: operations from their own assets and shares in the three pillars: Tengiz, 20%, Kashagan, 16.88%, and Karachaganak, 10%. Previously, their share in the three pillars and their own production was more balanced, but by 2025, the three pillars will account for over 50%, while Kasmunay Gas's own production will decline due to aging fields and a lack of investment in exploration.
Tengiz, Kashagan, Karachaganak — это
Tengiz, Kashagan, and Karachaganak operate under production sharing agreements, PSAs, and stabilization contracts. These agreements are often confidential and the terms remain unknown. The principle, however, is clear. Until investors recover their investments, we receive no profits. Investors frequently inflate budgets, as seen with the Tengiz expansion project, where costs soared from $18 to $19 billion to $48 to $50 billion. Even items like toilet paper were reportedly imported from Britain. Under such conditions, we'll never see our fair share of profits unless we revise these contracts. People ask why a resource-rich country like ours, with all of Mendeleev's periodic table beneath our feet, remains poor. It's a valid question because ours is an export-driven economy. Everything is extracted and exported, while nothing returns to us. Our Constitution states that the land and its resources belong to the people. However, the following clause specifies that ownership is exercised on behalf of the people by the government. If the government truly represented public ownership, it would allocate a set portion of oil export revenues to the budget, and Parliament would distribute these funds transparently. In this documentary, Who Owns Kazakhstan's Oil?, we aim to answer the most pressing questions about this sector. We will delve into the history and current state of the oil industry to understand how revenues are distributed today and who truly controls the wealth hidden beneath our soil.
Нас беспокоят и запасы.
We are concerned about reserves and what we will leave for future generations. Timely exploration is essential. Above all, our three leading companies, listen to us. The world has changed.
Что мир изменился не только.
Хороший пример Китая по углехимии. Почему Китай стал перерабатывать уголь?
China provides a good example in coal chemistry. Why did China turn coal into chemical products? Because it has little gas and oil and exports these resources to generate revenue at high export prices. Most of China's chemical products are derived from coal. Consider these figures. Kazakhstan extracts 110 million tons of coal, while China extracts 220 million tons. Yet, China earned $630 billion, whereas we earned only $3.5 billion. This illustrates the enormous potential of value-added processing. Imagine the problems we could solve in Kazakhstan with the additional $20 billion annually from customs duties and processing our own raw materials.
Ну, нефтянка обложена налогами, насколько это возможно. Вот.
The oil sector is taxed as heavily as possible. But let's consider these companies. The three pillars, Tengiz, Karachaganak, Kashagan, they pay significantly less in taxes and fees. If we don't revise these contracts, we won't balance the budget or improve the country's financial situation.
Даже расчеты с государством по этой.
The calculations for the state under these production agreements are minimized. These contracts date back to the late 1990s and early 2000s. What were the lease terms, tariffs, and tax rates then? They've remained unchanged, despite the global shifts since.
Инициатива Токаева.
President Tokayev's initiative for citizens to become stakeholders in natural resources is absolutely correct. In Norway, such decisions are implemented. To achieve this, contracts must be opened and their terms thoroughly examined. The state of the oil industry in the 1990s. After gaining independence, Kazakhstan faced new challenges, including the question of how to develop the oil industry without experience or technology for large-scale field development. This is when the idea of production sharing agreements, PSAs, emerged. The government proposed signing them with large foreign companies, but as it turned out later, they essentially became the owners of our oil. Of course, to some extent, this was a forced step. We had to do it. But the question is, how and under what conditions was this done? Unfortunately, this remains in the shadows. Only now, as a society, we are beginning to realize the true price Kazakhstan paid by opening its economy to foreign business moguls.
Все крупные проекты в нашей стране, мегапроекты, я рассматриваю как проекты первого президента.
All major projects in our country I see as projects of the first president. Because he practically destroyed political competition, there was no competition. He was irreplaceable, a complete monopolist. He could do anything. He had tremendous media power, and he could say anything. He made all the final decisions on serious matters. And at some point, it all began to happen in the interest of his family. The first billion, called Kazakh Gate, which our deputy Abildin mentioned in our session. This was back in the late 90s. A person took and appropriated $1 billion. How could he govern the country after that? In whose interest were these decisions made?
Случился Кантар, да, у нас 22 год. Я считаю, для нас.
The Kantar incident in 2022 occurred. I see it as a defining moment, a turning point, where we finally understand the old Kazakhstan is gone. Yes, in 2022, President Tokayev passed a constitutional amendment stating that the land and its subsoil belong to the people, and the state manages them on behalf of the people. We want fair distribution of the revenues from these resources.
Тот бюджетный кризис, тот бюджетный дефицит, который я вижу.
The budget crisis and the budget deficit I see today, they cannot be fixed by any other means. We cannot raise taxes for individuals to the point that they become unbearable, nor can we impose new taxes on the business sector. The oil industry, excluding Tengiz, Karachaganak, and Kashagan, already pays a lot. And for foreign investors, we must apply what our President Tokayev said, namely, a new fair Kazakhstan. There must be fairness, including in oil and gas contracts. If all other companies are paying this amount, the three pillars must do the same.
То и киты должны делать то же самое.
И самое главное, В этих соглашениях о разделе продуктов
The most important thing in these production sharing agreements is that the investor first recoups their costs and only then settles with the government. This directly encourages investors not just to inflate their costs, but to massively incur them. The investor is foreign, and all purchases for their investments are made through purchases in their home economies. Thus, local content at Tengiz, Karachaganak, and Kashagan is less than 6%, as President Tokayev once mentioned. These are like colonies on Mars, closed concessions extracting raw materials using foreign supplies and exporting them at intermediate prices, settling with the government at a minimum. So, more than 30 years have passed. Kazakhstan handed over major oil and gas assets to foreign companies, and international players entered our market. We hoped that everything would be done legally and fairly, but of course it didn't turn out that way.
по тем временам, боюсь, что другого механизма и не было.
Back then, there was no other mechanism. These were the final years of the breakup, not of the USSR, that was long gone, but of the national economy complex. And particularly, Kazakhstan's oil industry at that time was completely on its side. This was in 1993. 1994, things got even worse. There were no markets, no technology, no money. World oil prices back then were around $10 a barrel, which was even lower than the cost of producing our oil. And there was no one to sell it to because Kazakhstan, as part of the USSR, produced oil not for export, but for internal deliveries to the Union republics. So there weren't even structures to figure out what to do with the extracted oil.
Вот, например, в нашем же Сузове была такая ситуация.
For example, in our session, a group of international experts came to us in the parliament. They began explaining how to adopt a law on transfer pricing. That is, if I'm trading oil, for example, I usually do it through a trader. So this team comes in, we sit down, there's a delegation, translators, and even Mashkovich participated. They start explaining. One American, who was an oil man, says that the market is unstable and prices need to be raised above $10. We need to allow prices to go as high as 30. When it dawned on us what he wanted, I asked the American, "Listen, oilman, would you sell your American oil in Europe 30% cheaper? Would that be normal for you?" He was outraged. "Of course not. That's not normal." I replied, "Then why are you telling us this?"
Мы не ставим для себя задачу национализировать эти месторождения.
We don't aim to nationalize these fields or transfer them to someone else. Our main goal is to increase the efficiency of oil extraction from these fields. We're saying that we need to change the revenue structure of these fields by looking at the experience of other oil-producing transnational companies operating in other countries. We see that the main source of income is not extraction, but refining the oil, producing high-value products. That's what we need to do here. But unfortunately, today, if we talk about our fields, Tengiz, Karachaganak, Kashagan, 100% of the revenue structure is tied only to the simple export of our oil, which is sent through pipelines to Orsk, the refinery, and other foreign destinations via pipelines. Abandoning production, sharing agreements, the future of Kazakhstan. Some countries have reassessed their relationships with foreign oil companies. Let's take a look at what made them abandon production sharing agreements and how it impacted their economy.
СРП и тот формат работы, который есть, он практически, наверное, остался в том виде только...
The type of arrangement we have is practically the only one left in Kazakhstan from those old days. It's already been proven by global statistics that such agreements no longer exist anywhere in the world. Nobody signs them anymore. There are service contracts where a company comes to a field, and the country tells them, you extract 100,000 barrels per day, and we'll give you 10% of the profits. If you extract 200,000 barrels, you get 25%. These types of conditions are possible, and they should be adopted. There is leverage to pressure Tengiz, for example, because in 2033, the Tengiz contract ends, and as I understand it, there are talks about extending this contract for another 20 years. But I believe the Tengiz contract should not be extended.
Мы испытываем экономический кризис в целом.
We are experiencing an economic crisis right now. In general, we see that the biggest problem with the current economic model is that, in my opinion, it has already outlived its usefulness. Therefore, the only way to increase state and public revenues is to change the structure of our economy from export-oriented to processing-oriented. There's no other option. The strongest donor of our budget is the oil and gas industry. So by changing the export situation, we could quickly achieve a good financial result to replenish our budget and solve all our social issues.
И вот это решение сейчас в значительной степени будет зависеть от
This decision now largely depends on the public, on the people, who demand, through us, through other activists and experts, the disclosure of contracts. Then, we must take the next step, conclude the right agreements, and start filling the national fund.
Бахрейн, Саудовская Аравия, Эмираты, там, Катар и так далее, и так далее.
Peter Svoik says Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Qatar, and others. All these projects, if not based on production sharing agreements like ours, at least began with clear benefits and advantages for Western companies. The consequences of the Day of Judgment war and the oil embargo resulted in Arab regimes achieving from their Western partners what they themselves, the Arabs, had become owners of these fields. In the 1970s, Arab regimes and monarchies managed to implement the constitutional amendment that we passed in 2022 and have not even approached yet. The future of oil. Why transparency is needed. The world is moving towards new standards where transparency and fair distribution of resources matter. The future of oil is not just about economic gain, but also about social justice and responsibility to the people of Kazakhstan.
В парламенте долгие годы бьются за то, чтобы вообще посмотреть, что записано в этих контрактах.
For years, parliamentarians have been fighting to even see what is written in these contracts. For example, the faction of Azad Peruashev, the Akjol party. There are other deputies who are demanding from the government not just to make them public for everyone, but at least reveal them to the parliament. After all, the parliament, as the main elected body in the country, as one of the branches of power, should have access to these contracts. We need to understand what is written in them. Just recently, there was a government hour in the Mejlis, and one of the deputies gave an enormous figure that the consortium developing Kashagan allocates tens of millions of dollars for social projects. But you will be amazed. These funds allocated for social projects are later reimbursed from our oil. Can you imagine that? And this is just a small piece of the iceberg we don't know about. Under what conditions are these consortia leaving Kazakhstan? Maybe they are taking all the equipment. Maybe we still owe them additional sums, but in any case, Kazakhstan will bear the costs of preserving these fields after the contracts expire.
нефтяная отрасль, контракты, технологии. Там технологии наверняка нормальные.
The oil industry and technologies are probably normal, but there is also the possibility of earning unearned money. What entrepreneur would refuse that? No one. Therefore, the government must act, will must be there. We need to open the contracts. People should see we have a lot of good experts who will explain everything, lay it out step by step and tell us how to make decisions, and this should be fixed in the Majlis and monitored constantly. Everything should be in the public domain.
Добыча нефти в Саудовской Аравии и вот.
Oil extraction in Saudi Arabia and all other Arab states is nationalized. These are the consequences. But I wouldn't want us to have some Day of Judgment war and the shocks that come from it. However, it must be understood that oil extraction in Kazakhstan is not just about economic growth and filling the budget, but also a significant burden on the environment. No matter what the foreigners do, no matter how hard they try to hide their dubious actions, the damage to nature has already been done.
Как известно, для решения проблемы с падением.
As is known, to address the issue of the falling sea level in 2022, the consortium at Kashagan carried out large-scale dredging work, which, in my opinion, disrupted the ecosystem of the Caspian Sea as a whole, and did not solve the problem for the long term. In a short time, there were several serious problems in the Caspian, such as animal deaths and oil spills, and the environmental state of the sea is slowly approaching a catastrophic condition. To solve these problems quickly, a full study of the Caspian Sea is necessary, from its bottom to its coastal zones. It is necessary to inventory all sources of pollution that affect the Caspian and adopt a convention for saving the Caspian and improving its environmental status.
Мы должны комплексную работу вести должны. То есть все.
We need to do comprehensive work. That is, all available opportunities and tools must be used. One of them is to submit a petition. By collecting the signatures of the people, we can raise the issue and show the government that this is the public's request and sit down for negotiations. Discuss all the details and open up the contracts. show the arguments. And today, one of the important topics in Kazakhstan that concerns everyone is ecology. As for old wells, Kizilorda was mentioned. There is a 5-fold decrease. This is just an example of what awaits other regions. So, what will we do? What solutions do we have? Here's China. They have technology. They have increased their oil extraction rate by up to 55%. And there are other technologies. So, what are you doing now? How is your science working in this field? Is there any collaboration or not? Oil contracts and public control. Today, it can be said outright. Many oil contracts were concluded without proper public discussion. But now, times have changed. We live in a new Kazakhstan, and public control should become a guarantee of fairness and transparency. We don't want others to profit from us. It must be done right and fairly. The essence of this is what matters. I believe that if investors who are currently developing our deposits are truly interested in long-term relations with us, they must go ahead and meet our government and people first. They should change the terms of these contracts, and perhaps even voluntarily. It would be a good precedent for them, an exemplary one. Petition for oil contract, transparency, and what it can give. Kazakhstan. Can an ordinary signature change the future of a country? Can each of us contribute to the fair distribution of our land's wealth? The answers to these questions exist. Now, in Kazakhstan, there is a growing public movement for transparency in oil contracts. People are signing a special petition demanding the disclosure of contract terms to change them. After all, everything related to resources or subsoil, according to the Constitution, belongs to the people. A petition is more than just an expression of opinion. It's a chance for every Kazakhstani to cast their vote in favor of transparency in the country's oil and gas industry, and of course, to set the direction for its future, where natural wealth will serve the interests of society through the shift from export to deep oil processing within the country. On new technologies. For example, the world is moving towards technologies like smart companies, specifically oil companies. We're talking about improving the efficiency of the oil industry's digital infrastructure. Do we have this or not? Essentially, this is what we are pointing out, that there's an issue with the oil recovery factor. Here, the representatives of Kazmunegas explain it only by one reason: reservoir pressure, the presence of hydrogen sulfide. But it's simply the lack of new technologies. The petition can undoubtedly make a significant impact because, among other things, it's even a formal reason for the authorities to start responding in this direction. We're working at full speed, raising these issues. All of this is a fair Kazakhstan, what we're doing. Yes, there are concerns, we understand, many say. Do you know that the companies you're up against have overthrown governments in other countries? Of course, we understand very well how serious this is, how powerful these corporations are. But still, we believe that we are living in a different time now, and the people support us, and these changes are truly needed for our state.
Нам важно, чтобы нашими активами управляли максимальные профессионалы.
It's important for our assets to be managed by professionals, but these professionals must emerge through competition. If there's no competition, and if everything is being distributed like, I'll give this to him, and that to him, it will be unprofessional. It will harm us. We will lose, not gain. That's the first thing. The second thing is that there must be full transparency. When we conclude a contract with an investor, everything must be clearly spelled out, and all of it should be online. The issue of transparency in oil contracts has remained on the agenda for many years. In a situation where oil revenues are distributed behind closed doors and funds from its sale are recklessly spent by the government, many citizens feel disconnected from the wealth of their country. The petition, which anyone can sign right now in the e-Otnish section of the electronic government, has become a symbol of the fight for citizens' rights and the prosperity of future generations. As a public initiative, the petition is, in a literal sense, the aspiration of every Kazakhstani citizen to see real benefits from the country's natural resources. This is precisely what its authors are striving for.
Есть закон о петициях, где четко сказано, что петиция при наборе 50 тысяч.
There is a law about petitions that clearly states that when a petition reaches 50,000 signatures, it is considered successful, and the government is obliged to create a working group or commission. Accordingly, we are waiting for that. If we manage to gather the signatures, if our citizens actually hear and sign this petition, we hope for such an open dialogue. But that's one side. And on the other side, we see how previous petitions were considered not very objectively. I believe that in general, these petitions should probably not be considered by the state body that is essentially guilty in this situation. Perhaps, alternatively, it could be considered by the Mejlis or the Senate of Parliament.
Конечно, власть могла бы и без петиции это сделать, если бы просто...
Of course, the authorities could have done this without the petition. If they had just opened the Constitution somewhere and read that the land and subsoil belong to the people, that the state exercises the right of ownership on behalf of the people, and that the president of Kazakhstan represents the state and the people. Big bet on oil has been made. Kazakhstan is a country rich in natural resources, and as our research shows, its oil potential is still far from fully realized, and we have lost a lot due to mismanagement, corruption, and poor governance. Of course, looking back and assessing the path we've traveled, knowing that the hands of history cannot be turned back and what has been done cannot be undone, it is important not to despair, not to give up, but to confidently move forward. Each of us must clearly understand that we can earn an additional $20 billion a year from developing our oil fields, but only if we implement reforms, increase the transparency of the industry, and strategically and thoughtfully approach the redistribution of oil contracts.
СРП – это в целом такой колониальный инструмент взаимодействия между...
Our agreements with investors are essentially a colonial tool of interaction. Today, this model is practically no longer applied in the world. There are many examples, such as Russia, abandoning all such agreements due to the Yukos situation, and Kumtor, our Kyrgyz brothers, also rejected such contracts. There are many other examples, both positive and negative, but in general, we say that this tool has outlived its usefulness because it is opaque and mainly protects the interests of the investor more than the interests of the state.
40-й год для Казахстана будет, наверное, той переломной планкой.
The year 2040 will likely be the turning point for Kazakhstan when we won't be able to do much with our oil sector. By the 2030s, oil production will start to decline. Unfortunately, we are not the chosen ones, and our resources are not infinite. They will run out, and we will start to live worse and worse after the 2030s. By 2040, it will be an irreversible point when we won't be able to do anything with our oil sector.
Вот в тех регионах, где находятся эти месторождения,
in the regions where these oil fields are located, the environment is in a deplorable state. Take the Caspian Sea, for example. Of course, I can't directly link these companies to the death of seals. No one has conducted research on this yet. But why is this happening? Why is the death occurring? And from what exactly? It's unclear. And also, there is the birth of disabled children. And the fact is, during summer, we have sandstorms. And in winter, there are precipitation. This is already happening, and there's an impact on the environment. The new Fair Kazakhstan has given all political forces the opportunity to discuss such issues openly and democratically, without fear. And this topic is now being actively discussed in the Green Party BAYTAQ, together with the Entrepreneurs Alliance Parassat.
Мы хотим эти компании, которые транснациональные, которые зарабатывают.
We want these transnational companies that are profiting here to here. They need to allocate more funds for environmental restoration. You understand, with this argument, we can do it, and everyone will support us. The international community and international law are on our side.
Берем ту же Норвегию, есть вот...
Take Norway, for example. And there is statistics that says Norway earns 80% of its revenue from its own resources. And we earn, according to different estimates, only 15 to 20%. Our situation is the exact opposite. So it's urgent to replace this colonial tool with a more transparent system. By the way, we have state regulation, under which about 50 of our oil companies operate, including large foreign ones, such as the Chinese CNPC, and they all work and extract oil. And it benefits everyone. That's why I believe these three large investors of ours, the three mega sharks as we call them, should abandon their contracts and accept our national legislation. The new leaders have the right to decide how to effectively manage our natural wealth, taking into account international agreements, technological challenges, and environmental risks. Will they succeed? Certainly. This is beyond any doubt. Although the question we raise, who will manage the oil, what is its future, still remains without a clear answer. Unfortunately, there is still strong lobbying of old, outdated approaches and schemes.
В Казахстане правительство сейчас в этом направлении.
In Kazakhstan, I don't see any action from the government in this direction. Our Ministry of Ecology is very weak. If we take Germany, for example, their Ministry of Ecology is strong and works with state revenue, whereas ours seems like a formal organization. Overall, the Ministry of Ecology should conduct serious research and create a budget for environmental restoration. But we don't see that happening now.
В 90-х годах, то есть, был большой вопрос в технологиях.
In the 1990s, there was a big issue with technologies, and of course, we were in a transitional period when our authorities wanted to do some things. Well, this investigation, Kazakhgate, came from that time. The whole story, this desire of someone to illegally enrich themselves, and our so-called friends took advantage of it. They set up a system that benefited them, and today our hands are tied, and we're afraid of any responsibility before international organizations, and we cannot break these agreements. What path will the country take for the development of the oil sector? What to do? Continue attracting foreign investors or support our own, while focusing on the domestic market and increasing our own processing? One thing is clear. Against the backdrop of global trends and the rising demand for energy resources, Kazakhstan must reset the oil industry and find its own way for Kazakhstani oil in the new era.